Hi, everyone. We're going to get started here this afternoon. I'm Steve Schreiber, the chair of architecture at UMass, and welcome to our spring lecture series. So we have a terrific series planned for this spring and I wanted to particularly acknowledge Pari Riahi, who is here on the call, but you might not be able to see her, who has been our tireless organizer of the lecture series. Tonight, we're honored to have a terrific architect as our first lecturer. James Garrett, who's from Minneapolis, St. Paul area, was born in St. Thomas, US Virgin Islands, to American parents who returned stateside when he was very young. He spent his formative years in St. Paul, Minnesota, where his interest in cities was sparked. Growing up in the post-industrial era that gave rise to hip-hop culture and graffiti writing, he has made it his mission to reconnect art and architecture. His work as a founding partner of St. Paul's 4RM plus ULA combines resiliency and dynamic expression in the form of vibrant color and diverse media. Founded in 2002, the firm has evolved into a full-service practice focused on transit design and transit-oriented development. He was educated at Berkeley and Parsons. And I should mention that I've known of his work for a while, but I heard him speak for the first time this summer at a panel discussion that was organized by two of our alums who founded an organization called Designing in Color. And he was part of one of their lecture series of really focusing of architects from diverse backgrounds. So we're deeply honored that Mr. Garrett is speaking here at UMass via Zoom tonight. So please join me in welcoming James Garrett. Oh, I should mention before we start that you can ask questions anytime during this presentation. Just enter your questions into the question and answer box, and I will compile them and curate them and ask Mr. Garrett at the end. And at the very end, we hope to elevate all of you to panelists so that we can see each other and that we can have a more informal discussion. So now, please join me in welcoming Mr. James Garrett.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve and Pari. I'm going to share my screen now and pull the presentation up. I have a lot of content for you to get to in a relatively short period of time. And so my plan is to work through the content, and then hopefully there'll be some ideas and some questions, and we'll be able to have a nice, robust conversation on the backside. So I appreciate you all for inviting me here today. And the subject that I want to speak on is advancing justice through low-income supportive housing. And I want to do so through a case study for a project that my firm Formula recently completed in 2019. And this project is a 72-unit supportive housing project for men who have either been homeless or at risk of homelessness due to prior incarceration. So men that are literally often coming right out of the carceral system after having spent 10, 20, 25, 30 years away from their families and their communities. Formula's method or modus operandi is to really center community and individuals and then begin to wrap the architecture around them. The first thing that I want to acknowledge is that nothing happens without a good team. So our team is amazing, and for this particular project, the design process began well before we ever put pencil to paper, so to speak. Our design process begins in forming the proper partnerships and teaming relationships that we think are going to be necessary to design a building of the highest possible quality. In this instance, we really took our core team, which was composed of myself as a design architect, Nathan Johnson, my business partner as project architect, Lissa Washington as our project manager, my wife, Paula Sanchez Garrett as our project technician, and then Michael Lima, who was our project designer. So that was our core design team, and that sort of remains, has been and remains our core design team. And then we always take a look at the requirements of the project, the size and scope of the challenge in front of us. And we start to say, who in our community, who in our circle could we bring in to partner with us and successfully execute specific aspects of the project. In this case, the first person we reached out to was Rosemary Delata, who is a wonderful architect in her own right. She had a firm called Concentric Architecture at the time. Her specialist, she was a specialist in affordable housing compliance. So her specialty was understanding all of the various red tape, all of the bureaucracy, all of the different technical requirements that we were going to need to reach and clear in order for our client to be able to get the funding that they were applying for from the different nonprofit housing ecosystem grants. So those programs are often very intense and very bureaucratic. And so we needed someone on the team who was good at that and who thrived in that to free us up to do the tasks that we are actually best suited to do. The other piece of this is we wanted to bring in a visual artist because we believe that healing happens through art and that art has a healing capacity unlike anything else. And so Roger Cummings, who is a frequent co-conspirator of ours and co-collaborator on a number of different projects, his office where he actually has his art practice is literally just a few doors down here in our building in downtown St. Paul. We brought him in to be able to do two specific things. One, to be able to create an art-based engagement process so that we could probe deeply into the minds of the men that we were serving with this project. And then also the second piece of that was that we would work through him to start creating authentic, relevant artworks that represented the process and the discoveries that were made throughout the course of engaging the men in the program. So our process is a little bit different. We wanted to really elevate the people that would be living and doing their work in this building, in this facility. And so we had maybe a lower number of meetings dedicated to the owners, the developers on the project, and we really wanted to elevate the voices of the people, and we really spent the bulk of our engagement effort on really getting to know the people that would be living there and working there. In this particular case, we were serving two masters in essence. On one hand, we had Beacon Interfaith Housing, which was our developer, which is technically the building owner and the people that were responsible for financing and capital stacking this project and making it happen. The project manager also came from their side, but Better Futures Minnesota is really an important piece of this because there's a service provider that will be living on site, that will be hosting the classes and the training, the employment training for the men in the program. And this is, an equally important partner. The first thing that we did was we had Roger and Lissa, pictured here, lead a kickoff meeting in our office where I'm sitting now. And in this sort of first meeting, we had the high level folks from both sides. So from the owner side, which is technically the housing developer, we had their project manager, we had their upper level leadership, And then also from Better Futures, which is our service provider, we had their CEO and their high level staff and leadership as well. And at this first kickoff meeting, we wanted to set the tone for the fact that this was going to be a very different process than anything that they had probably gone through, and that we needed them to really trust the process and give us an opportunity to take them step by step. We were going to do things differently, and we endeavored to end up with a very different result. And so that was a difficult sell, but it was something that, we had won the RFP based upon, the feedback from them was they really liked the idea of art integration and bringing visual artists to the table, and that, art has healing properties, and that we would set those healing properties loose in this process, and we would do our best to engage the men in the program. And so they said that that was something that attracted them to us, and so we had to hold them to it. And it got very interesting. The first meeting on the top, we made buttons. Roger Cummings put together an art program where we made buttons. We used power words, words that defined us, things that were important to us, and our principles and values. And so all of these stakeholders got to make their own buttons. He had a button punch and a laminator, and it was a lot of fun. And so we were getting to know each other and breaking the ice. And then everybody had to wear these buttons, and these buttons basically said why you were doing this difficult work, this challenging work, what was important to you about it. And then, you wear that button, you have to live up to what it says on that button, and people can hold you accountable to what you're saying and what you're representing. And so that's how we kicked it off. That's how we started the process off. The next meeting, Roger focused on creating art engagement, fun opportunities with the staff from Better Futures Minnesota. The staff that would be, some of them would be working there in the building on site. Others interact with the men in their work locations. Many of the men are learning deconstruction. That is an architectural salvage process that is really big here. It's resilient and green and sustainable in that we're not just dumping buildings and landfills as much, but we're taking all of the salvageable materials, the woods, the flooring, the cabinets, anything of value, and we're saving that, and we're pulling that and diverting that out of the landfill. And then Better Futures has a reuse center where they sell those to the general public, and it's very popular here in town. And so some of the folks in this meeting on the bottom work in that aspect of the program, and then others actually work directly with counseling and other staff tasks. So getting them into the spirit, talking with them, painting with them, having great conversations, and getting to know the challenges and also the hopes and aspirations that they had was really important. The third meeting, as well as the fourth, fifth, and sixth meetings, really the bulk of the remaining 2-hour engagement sessions were dedicated to the men of the program that were in the program currently. And the task that we gave them was to basically talk, to engage, to interact, and allow us to listen. So I came up with a series of questions that I thought was really important. And then Roger came up with some fun activities for each of the following meetings to begin to engage the men in a way that then they could open up and have real conversations about, centering around the questions of, what does family mean for folks that have been separated from their biological families for decades, in some instances? What does belonging mean to people who have been separated from, their communities, the communities that they were raised in, that they were familiar with for many years? And so how do you reintegrate if you don't understand, what belonging means, what love means, what inclusion means? So that was something that was really important to us. It was something that we engaged the men in and had some really fun activities where we listened to them tell us and show us the types of things that they thought and the types of things that they aspired to. So we feel like that was a really important piece of this project. Many of the men we suspect had never been listened to before. And that's at least part of the reason why they ended up in the predicament that they ended up in, because they weren't heard growing up, they weren't listened to, and they didn't feel like they had a pathway towards really being included in the process of socialization that we have in our society. So we wanted to intervene and interject and give them an opportunity to really express themselves. So out of that process, we came up with a laundry list of recurring themes, things that were really important to the men that kept happening over and over, meeting after meeting. And so what I asked Roger to do was to start to compile a running list of important recurring themes and to do it graphically. And so he started to come up with these graphic notations and pictograms that started to describe some of the themes that kept coming up over and over again. And there were 6 themes. We kind of narrowed it down to like 6 fundamental themes that we thought were significant enough that we would start to find creative ways to integrate those things into the building itself. So the first theme is love. The second theme that kept happening over and over was faith. The next theme that kept happening over and over was family support. The next theme was acceptance. The next theme was called future change. And the final one was called inclusion. So inclusion was something that was really important to the guys, and we really took note of all of these things. The next piece was I sat down with Roger as he was developing these pictograms that I thought were great. And I started thinking, you know what? The pictograms themselves might be powerful enough and deeply tethered enough to the experiences of the men in the program that finding opportunities to represent these things boldly and in a grand sort of presentation format might be a sufficient way to fit within the budget and also integrate some of these things into the building in a way that they're not seen as extra or something that can be, taken off or value engineered out of the process. And so one of the things that I've always felt is that low income housing and supportive housing often tends to be extremely blocky and nondescript. Often it's difficult to ascertain where the entry is. How do you approach this place? How do you enter it? We wanted to flip the script on that and create something that celebrates the entry. So that was our primary goal, was to celebrate the entry using art and light. And so we found a creative way to perforate metal and integrate the perforated metal into the actual, in this case, on the front entry of the building. We have these wing walls that project out. And so we cut the art piece into abstracted strips, and we started to align those strips between the header of the windows on the lower level and below the sill of the windows on each subsequent level. And we wanted to be very careful, because of the feedback from the men, that they didn't want anything covering their view out of the rooms, because some men were triggered, and the traumatic experience of being incarcerated is something that we really needed to avoid. And so we abstracted, we made sure that none of the windows were obstructed or covered up, that there was no light directly coming into the windows. And we created these bands and these ribbons that wrapped around and then expressed themselves on top of the building. And so that was something that started to include the artwork and started to include the experiences, the lived experiences as voiced by the men in the program themselves. And so this is how the front entry of the building turned out. Again, we have signage, we have artwork that climbs up the building and really expresses itself. And we have color changing LEDs that are controllable by the individual at the front desk can control the colors, and sometimes the colors are the same all night. Sometimes they rotate, and they can control the speed of the rotation. And on special occasions, they can program the lighting on their own to be able to celebrate and express the things that are important to them. So we wanted to create art that not only was an expression as interpreted by the artist, but we wanted to add Easter eggs into that art that would allow them to literally express themselves over time. So as you enter the building, the signage that says Great River Landing and the canopy is out here. And these are the front entry doors and the front entry sequence. There's a mail area here. And we created this threshold, which was really important to us and also to the men. This threshold is almost like rolling out the red carpet, so to speak, but in this case, it's rolling out the reclaimed wood carpet, and it rolls, it unfurls itself from the common space in the adjacent room. It rolls down the hallway, it hits the wall, and it folds back up on the ceiling. And essentially, this is a portal that the men pass through, a threshold that essentially separates what's happening outside on the streets and in the city, the chaos, in an urban environment about 2 blocks from downtown Minneapolis. And then they're crossing over through this threshold into this space that they can call home. And we wanted it to feel like home. We wanted there to be soft materials. We wanted there to be similar lighting to what they have on the exterior, but now it's on the interior, and the men have a chance to control it. We put the controller in a public space. And so any man in the program who's going to get his mail can dial the switch up and put it on whatever color they're feeling that day. And so it's pretty funny to go into the building and go into a meeting and then come out. And the color's been changed a few times since then, depending on who's there. And the space was meant to be a comfortable space. It's a space that a lot of people hang out. It's almost never empty. The most significant piece of this is that the reclaimed wood was literally reclaimed from some of the buildings that these men themselves, with their own hands, deconstructed. And so we were very intentional about purchasing wood from the reuse center that actually is a part of these men's programs. We wanted to help reinvest in the program and take some of the proceeds from the project itself and reinvest in these men's lives as a design team, but also really show that what they do is important and that it's beautiful, and that everyone that enters this building, all of the visitors and even the men when they come home every day, get to see the fruits of their labor displayed in a way that we think is quite interesting and engaging and pretty beautiful. And so it really feeds into the pride and the self-worth that the work that you're doing, the physical labor that you're doing during the day can result in really powerful outcomes. And so one of the things as this thing was going up and starting to be framed, the men asked specifically, they wanted me to know that they didn't want this space to feel too polished or too perfect, because they felt like their lives were imperfect and there's still beauty in imperfection. So is there a way that you could sort of make it not perfect? And so our conclusion was that we would use reclaim woods from different species. We would do a lot of taboos, right? We would mix species, lengths, widths of boards. We would create a collage essentially of wood as you found it, and no special resins or stains. We would literally just take the wood as it was found, as it was pulled up, and as it was purchased. And we had the flooring contractor install it as was. And so it gave that sort of texture and it gave that imperfection, but we feel like it turned out beautifully. And so that beauty and imperfection theme began to carry through in the space. So here you can kind of see just some of the different lighting options that they have, some of the popular presets. And like I said, it's really fun because the lighting changes frequently, and anybody has control. It's a democratic space. Anybody has control of the lighting. And so here you have another look, just looking down the hallway and at the main reception desk. Again, there's this really unfinished wood mixing species, and it gives kind of a rough look, but it's also a warm feel to the spaces. This is sort of looking from the commons area. And then this is the commons area itself. So this is the community room. So this is sort of where that yellow brick road leads. It goes straight towards the food. So there's an area down here where they set up meals every night. They have a warming kitchen, and the meals are set up so that the men can eat every morning. There's some type of breakfast, and then in the evening when they come home from work, there's a dinner, and they can dine together, or they can take their food and go up to their individual apartments and do it that way. But they have the option to socialize and to interact together. And on most nights, most of the men do sit down here. And actually, they sit down here during the day. They sit down here whenever they're not working and socialize and hang out and people watch. And we wanted to locate it prominently on the edge of the building. We wanted this to be a public facing space, and we wanted them to feel integrated into this new community, this new neighborhood that they were going to be in. One of the important spaces that's adjacent to the lobby is the classroom. So in this room, they learn a lot of different skills, and there's a lot of training that takes place. And it's a space that I think the guys take a lot of pride in. They're healing, they're learning, they're applying the knowledge and the new experiences that they're having. And again, it's a space that's almost always used. There's somebody in this classroom space almost all the time. Next to that is the workout room. So the idea here was that we came to understand that a lot of the men deal with their trauma from their incarceration through physical activity. And so we wanted to provide a space at street level, looking out into the neighborhood, similar to any other residential building that has, a gym on the main floor. We wanted to be able to provide that for those men in this program. One, because there's a normalcy to having this. All the other buildings that are being built in the neighborhood have these visible first floor gyms. We wanted this to be similar and feel like the market rate buildings around them. And then we also knew that this space needed to be accessible 24 hours a day for men who couldn't sleep, who were having nightmares, who were having, whatever types of issues, that there would always be a space that they could come, get on a treadmill, get on a rower, punch the punching bag, and, help work through their trauma or whatever they were feeling in that way. So this is an important space. It's a small space, but it gets a lot of use. This is another space that we had to fight for. This space is on the opposite corner of the building, and it is essentially a conference room slash viewing space slash showroom for some of the different products that they make. So this flooring, again, is reclaimed flooring from them. The cap on top of the fireplace area here is a board out of a building that's more than 100 years old. There's this situation down here with some furniture that the men have been learning how to make. And ultimately, this space will, again, serve dual purposes. The board will be able to meet and have meetings. The staff and the board will have meetings. But then this space will be open during certain times of the day and certain days of the week. And people from the general public will be able to flow into this space, learn about the Better Futures organization, see some of the work that they do, look at some of the products will be on display here. And we felt like this would be a great way for folks in the community, in this very market rate neighborhood around them, to get to know the men in a way that says, hey, these are the guys that do the cool furniture or have the really awesome flooring, right? And the old growth lumber, instead of, this building being completely shut off and turning inward, and then neighbors whispering about, oh, these were the men that were locked up. These are the scary men. So early on, we had this idea that we would have this part of the building that is semi-accessible to the public and could welcome the public in and give them an introduction to the men and what they do that was positive so that they could be seen as an asset to the neighborhood and not as a detriment. The next piece was coming up with an art plan in which we were able to think through the building and tell a story of entering the building, settling yourself, orienting yourself, and going up or down and being able to have art greet you and help you navigate through the space. So beginning with the basement level down here, we had Roger pick out a custom color for each floor and match it with artwork that started to tell the story of the importance of each of the different pictograms and the different themes. And so the idea is that here, this is the main lobby space, right adjacent to the front desk, the reception desk, and then the stairwell and the elevator above that, as it rises through the building. Each floor is demarcated instead of numerals and letters, as prisons and carceral systems have it. We wanted it to be known for color and art. So you live on the acceptance floor, or you live on the family floor, right? So we thought that that was important to de-center some of the carceral techniques for wayfinding and recenter this space around art and healing. So the first piece that Roger did is the love piece. It is in the basement, it is in the garage, and it's the first thing that people that are driving or they have a van that often picks them up and takes them to different job sites. When they park the van, this is the first thing that they're confronted with is love, because it's the fundamental, it's literally the foundation of everything that this program is trying to do, and everything that these men need to understand moving forward is rooted and based in love. The main floor has a artwork called Faith, and this is the actual piece of the abstracted version that appears on the front entry marker. So the front entry marker essentially cut the piece in half, took this half and wrapped it around the top, and then cut the strips all the way down to the water and wrapped those strips at the floor line and at the canopy of the main canopy. And so the important thing to note here is that there's a didactic on the right side, just on this floor, that talks about the process. It talks about the engagement process. It talks about what Roger did with the men and why, and how future men that weren't involved in that process were still represented, because this process looked at the conditions that they all had in common and tried to create an artwork to address not just the men that were there, but also looking forward, the themes that the new men coming into the program would also face and hopefully be inspired by. And then there's a didactic on the other side of the artwork, and actually on each floor here, that says the name of the piece and the significance of the symbols. So that was the first floor. This is the second floor. So this is acceptance. Right down the hall from here, also with the yellow, the bright yellow color, is the children's room. So this space is a miraculous space that literally was created on the fly. We literally had to readjust the rooms and the plan, make some rooms smaller, tighten some things up, turn some things parallel in order to carve out this space on the second floor for kids. One of the things that we learned through the engagement process, one of the themes that was recurring over and over and over again, was these guys were talking about their kids, their families, their kids in particular, and wanting to reunite with and begin rejuvenating their relationships with their children. And so this didn't appear on the spreadsheet that we were given from either client, right? From the service provider side or from the developer side. Nobody said anything about anything with kids. And so we were listening to the guys and kids, and then we were looking at our programming documents and there's nothing in there. So this was some conversations that we negotiated to create some spaces specifically for kids, so that, with the understanding that one of the ways to combat recidivism is for guys to re-engage and reunite with their families and with their kids. So it's the best measure that we have of keeping guys from reoffending and going back. And so it was something that all of us then agreed on that was important. And we were able to shift some things around in the schematic design process in order to make space for children. If you go further down the hallway, still on the second floor, there's this big lounge space. We wanted to create a lounge space that was connected to some of the offices of staff, so that on the living floors, the guys knew that there was help, there was assistance, there was people that they could talk to, could help solve problems. They didn't have to always go down to the first floor; that they could walk down the hallway from some of the residential levels, and also have this level of service. And the staff had an integration with the men. They weren't always separate from, but they were building relationships, and they were physically close to where the men were living and habitating. So that was something that's really important. So this space opens out onto a patio that I'll show you later, and it has a really great view of downtown Minneapolis. It's a very peaceful place. It's a place where the guys go to watch TV, they go to have activities together, and it gets a lot of use. This is the upper half of that. So it's a double height space on the second floor that spans up to the third floor. And so again, there's some offices here where there's staff close to them, and very accessible for the men that are living on the second and again on the third floors. And so if you go down that hallway again, back to that same vertical stack in the building, you come into the family support mural. And this one, again, is really poignant and meaningful, and something that really helps set the tone for the men when they return home to their floor. This, again, on that same third floor, is just an example of one of the typical units. There's two unit types in this building. One is a large 4-bedroom suite where each man has his own room that he can lock, his own bedroom that he can lock. And then there is a common space that has a dining room, kitchen, and living room. And so they share the dining room, kitchen, and living room, and then they have their own individual lockable private bedroom sleeping spaces. So those spaces are reserved for men that are new to the program, that are transitioning in, and using the cohort model, that guys can help each other. They build camaraderie, they live together, they can help each other figure things out, and they're going through the same struggles, and they're all transitioning together. And so that is one of the unit types. The other unit type is for men that have been in the program for a period of time. They're comfortable, they've advanced with their skills and with their education and their training to a point where they have the responsibility to be able to live alone. And so we created these studio apartments for them. Very simple, a small bed. You've got, some very basic furnishings. You have a kitchen, and then beyond the kitchen, there is a bathroom with a bathtub, and we will talk about that later. So that's kind of a basic accommodation. There's a small closet here with a curtain to kind of conceal things. And then this is another important piece. This is called inclusion. This is on the next floor, the fourth floor. One of the special things about the fourth floor and the fifth floor is that we included these meditation rooms. This was another innovation that came directly out of the engagement process, out of the 6 weeks that we spent engaging and talking to the men in the program. One of the things that we learned is that the men need a place to sort of retreat and fall back into. Some of the new tactics for conflict resolution that they're learning for successful conflict resolution is retreat. Sometimes diffuse a situation, by just walking away from it, taking some deep breaths. And so we needed to create some spaces where people could go where that could take place. Another use of these spaces is some of the guys pray. Some of the guys are Muslim and they need to pray. They need a space to pray, a private space to pray, and they can, come into these rooms. There's two on each floor, one on either end of the building. And again, they have that opportunity to be able to pray, to meditate, to do whatever they need to do peacefully. Some of the rooms have really beautiful views, again, of the skyline of the city, and it's just a nice place to be. These spaces were getting used from the time the building was when we first got our temporary certificate of occupancy to start moving some of the guys in. This space we would always find with coffee cups and things on that ledge, on that windowsill, that there were men in this space taking advantage of the space even before the building was fully leased out. And so this is future change, right? So this is about being able to make the necessary changes, positive changes to return back to your community and to the cities as whole people. And so this piece is, again, very meaningful that Roger created. So just to look at the exterior a little bit, this was the exterior rendering that we used for fundraising purposes. This shows that celebration of the entry with the lettering and the signage there, and it creates sort of a complete scene of bright, airy, new opportunities, something that looks modern and can fit into a neighborhood that is a market rate neighborhood with it's a growing neighborhood, a former industrial part of town that has now had lofts and new condos popping up every year. And so understanding that this is the only low income housing that may ever exist in this stretch of the North Loop of Minneapolis. And so we wanted something that would fit in and feel at home amongst some of the market rate buildings. You can see some of the market rate buildings down the block in the distance, and then also the skyline of Minneapolis. So this is the building. This is Great River Landing. This is looking at it from the other direction. Again, this is that common room or that community room where a lot of the eating takes place. This is just a daytime view. So you can see how we integrated art into the wing walls as well as the flat panels above the entry. And then also we subtly integrated color. So we have orange panels that you can't see from the head-on views. And then the orange panels are also on the fascia underneath the building. So when you come through the canopy is this orange color. So we wanted to integrate some color into the front facade, but do it subtly. And then we wanted the building to really come alive in an unexpected way at night. So if you come down the driveway, there's a small parking lot behind the building, some accessible spaces. And then this is basically the rear elevation. This is another view, so you can kind of see the patio space that comes out of the main lounge. And there's generally a lot of guys out here smoking. The building is smoke free and alcohol and substance free. And so the one place that they can come out and smoke is on the patio here. And then this is another miracle space. So this is the outdoor component to the children's room. So we wanted people to be able to get outside on a nice day with their kids. And so we used the building to shield off and create this small park-like space in the back. And so there's enough grass that you can throw a football or kick a soccer ball around with your kid. There's a toddler little play space, play equipment here. And then there's a seating area that will ultimately have some barbecue spaces, so that when the weather's nice in Minnesota, which we only get about 6 months of, people like to be outside and take advantage of it. So this is essentially the rear elevation in a way that you can start to get a feel for how the cars descend down the ramp into the parking garage. And then this is an aerial view, a drone view of the building, and it starts to reveal 122 Hanwha photovoltaic cells that we have on the roof. And so this is something that we take great pride in. Um, it was said that it couldn't be done, that these types of buildings for this type of population doesn't have technology that advanced, and green building techniques and materials and methods of construction were seen as something that were impossible. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but we take great pride in looking at the rooftop and being able to point to um, this essential small power plant on top that provides energy for the residents that live within the building. So again, you can see how close it is to downtown St. Paul, or I'm sorry, downtown Minneapolis, and the Minnesota Twins Stadium is in the distance here. So one of the things that I wanted to share today is that it's really important to challenge assumptions about low-income housing. Um, Low-income housing and supportive housing for vulnerable populations really comes with a whole set of baked in prejudice and inequality. And a lot of it is just due to the mentality that the folks that tend to develop and design this type of housing have. So this type of housing is very rarely designed by people that actually, by architects that actually look like the people that live there. In this case, it was a very special thing to work on a project like this, and a lot of the men took a lot of pride from seeing Black architects and designers on the job site and out there answering questions and being very active and engaged in and interested in their development. It was something that was a point of conversation whenever I come into the building for whatever reason. Even to this day, I'm always stopped by somebody and they recognize me as the architect and they want to talk, and that's a powerful thing, to be able to have that representation and to see people who look like you doing things. On the flip side of it, for us understanding this population, I mean, these guys are my cousins and my, uncles. And I mean, I make no distinction. I'm a public school kid. I grew up in the city. I'm a city kid. These guys are guys that I grew up with and that I know very well, figuratively, if not in some cases, literally. And they're guys that I see at the grocery store. There's guys that I see around because I'm in the city. So it's really important to have people that can relate, designers that can relate to the people that are going to be living in the buildings. Far too often we don't. And when you're living in a suburb and you're from a completely different ethnic group and social class, and you're designing something for this type of a vulnerable population, it's often just a performative gesture. It's something that you do because it's your job, but you're not able to empathize. You don't go the extra mile in trying to be inclusive and thoughtful about how to integrate people, vulnerable people, into the design process. And so you end up making a lot of decisions that are, they're analog decisions, right? They're not smart technology decisions. They're dumb, right? They're analog. And so one of the big things that the assumption is always that you're just going to have siding on the building, right? It's low income. It's just going to be siding. So in the Midwest, especially, I mean, they used to just throw vinyl or aluminum siding up there. And then vinyl siding, got a bad reputation because it's a terrible product. And so then it started to be fiber cement. And so the idea is it's going to be fiber cement that's stamped to kind of look like wood. And that's what it is. Whenever you see that, you almost always know that it's low income building. It creates a stigma. It's a visual cue that this is not up to par, that the people that live here are not of means. And me being someone that comes from this environment, I refuse to participate in those tropes and those visual cues that allow people the ability to create those stigmas. So we fought for a high performance facade, a facade that had a modified rain screen integrated into it to be able to create that pressure equalization and to keep the walls dry. Especially in this very difficult climate where we have a lot of issues with moisture and dew points because we have to have such high temperatures on the inside and we have such cold extreme temperatures through half the year on the outside. And so we were able to work with a product, a Nichiha product, that was a rain screen system. So it is a form of cement fiberboard, but it is not just siding. It's literally a smart system that contributes to a high performance facade. It was said it couldn't be done and there wouldn't be money in the budget for it. We said, hold our beer, go with the process. Another one of these challenging assumptions that is constantly made to much of our chagrin is this notion that every single really residential multifamily building right now will have the all-in-one direct vent system. There's many different brand names for it. There's one that's particularly popular. And it literally is an absurd system that requires these 4 square foot holes essentially to be cut through every single unit. And so in our case, there would be 72 of these, basically cutting like Swiss cheese holes all throughout our facade. So even though we have this great rain screen system and we have a continuous insulation that exceeds the local building codes and all this stuff, you start to cut these 4 foot 2x2 essentially holes throughout the building 72 times, and you destroy any viability of that facade to be able to keep moisture out, to be able to help with the dew point transition situation that causes a lot of mold and sick building syndrome. And then you have this huge chunk of the building that 72 units times 4 square feet. You have this huge essentially cut out of the building that does not have insulation performance. And so it's an absurd thing, but it was an assumption that was made that we fought against and we just refused to accept. And we ended up vetting some other systems with we had a really great mechanical engineering team and basically Gaussman and Moore, and they basically created a hybrid system that was a Bulldog heat pump, air exchanger system with a rooftop chiller. This is the chiller on top of the roof. And essentially it provides a high performance product with everything exiting out of the roof and nothing sort of exiting through wall. And so we were able to keep our rain screen intact. We're able to keep our facade and our insulation intact. And we're able to vent things on the roof. Heat wants to rise. It wants to go up anyway. You have some minimal rooftop operations to be able to basically run and pump, liquid throughout the building in order to heat and cool it. So the system performs better, and it ended up being surprisingly close in price. It was almost a wash. So the notion that you have to just automatically start out with this de facto, really crappy direct vent system that really doesn't perform is a misnomer and an assumption that we have to push back against and say, you know what, it's not logical, it doesn't make sense, and I don't care that every other supportive housing or low-income housing building has one. We are not going to have one. We are going to look for a high-performance solution that can come in line with the budget and the money that we have available. Another one of the assumptions that we had to push back against in this project is that there should be no wood, right? So these types of buildings have to be durable. They have to basically be built like fortresses because, certain types of people, certain types of vulnerable populations, people of low economic means, they're really rough on buildings, and it's basically this savagery argument that says that everything has to be a hard surface, has to be concrete, steel, tile, because these buildings don't wear well. We wanted to challenge that and fight back against that and say, we want to support the men in their mission. We want to basically have products that they created and center that and display that and put that basically on the stage so that all the visitors come in, can see their work, and we are steadfast in that. That is a significant level of importance that it supersedes what you did in your last 10 or 20 buildings. We really believe in this, and we were able to successfully make that argument right down to the last day when flooring was supposed to be installed. There were folks on the owner side that were still trying to convince me that we should just go with tile because they're nervous about the wood. The wood is there. It's been installed for almost 2 years now. It's beautiful. The men take really good care of it, and so far there haven't been any of the catastrophic failures that were predicted. Another challenge is twofold. There was a notion that we should have small windows instead of large windows, right? Small windows cost a little bit less. Our pushback was that these men have been incarcerated. They've been in close quarters for years, decades, for some of them. We need to have the biggest possible windows and to get the most light and air into these spaces. And that was a little bit controversial. But we also, to take the controversy to another level, we said not only that, but instead of the fixed window, like you see on the left slide, we needed to have operable windows so that the men could crank the window open and get a breeze. They could have that control over their environment, because the windows in jails and in prison facilities are fixed. There is no control. There is no opening, closing, getting a draft, getting a breeze going. And so again, we wanted to have the micro decisions that differentiate the men's experience from being incarcerated to being free and back out into society. So little things like being able to change the color on the lighting, we wanted them to be able to have the control of that. Things like this, we wanted them to have control over their microclimate. And if the air gets stuffy, they need to be able to crack a window and, like anybody else, like any other free citizen, and to be able to have that access. And so that's, was a point of contention and something that, we pushed for and advocated for, that got built into the building. And, I mean, you drive past, you see a lot of the windows cracked open all times of the year. So we feel like that's something that people are taking advantage of and using and appreciating. And then this one here was a big one. This is essentially the shower debate. So we started to get pushback. We designed tubs into the buildings because we believe that men that have been, especially men that have been incarcerated and forced to stand up and take showers every day of their lives on cue for the last several years or several decades, that they deserve to have the choice, the opportunity to sit down and take a bath if they wanted to. And even if they chose to take a shower every single day, they deserve to have the option to be able to make that choice for themselves as free human beings. And so there became a lot of pushback at the last minute that we should just make this all showers, and that we're wasting 3 square feet of ground space by having the tub instead of the shower. And so we're wasting space, and the showers, the shower units cost a little bit less, a couple $100 less than the tub surrounds. And we were just like, that's not just. That is a tiny expense, over the course of a, $13 million project. We can find the money to keep these little things into the project. And it's about justice, and it's about giving people human choices. And, we made that case. I had to write a letter at one point to just clarify our position on it. And to the owner's credit, they read the argument, they listened to what I had to say, and they agreed that we were going to leave the tubs in. And Lissa, the project manager, was there one day doing some punch list stuff, and she texted me. She told me she overheard 2 men having a conversation in the hallway, and one of them was saying that he felt like $1 million because he had taken a bath, and that he hadn't taken a bath. He couldn't even think of the last time he actually took a bath, and that he felt so good after taking this bath. And so she texted me that and said, I think we were right. I think that validates, if even one person, if it makes a difference in even one of these guys' lives, we've stood up for something and been on the right side of an argument. And the last thing, again, is the solar panels. So we really fought to have the solar panels included in the project. We were told that there was no budget for it. We disagreed. We said that we will find money in the budget for this to integrate this. There's a great architect here in a local firm here that talks a lot about sustainability. And he says that sustainable green buildings don't cost more, they cost differently. And so we really take that to heart. We feel like our buildings don't necessarily cost more, they just cost differently. We're making a different calculus and we're going down a different critical path. And we're going to end up with, in our opinion, a qualitatively superior product at the end for all. And so this was one of those things. We had to take them out because of the budget concerns. We were right on budget. We were right on target in terms of our estimate, and the bids came back right on time. But it was just a perception that there's no money to put these on this type of a building. And so what we did was we negotiated with the owner that we would make it solar ready and put in the piping and the conduit and leave it ready to be cabled up and for panels to be installed. And so that was something that they could live with. We did that. And then we just committed ourselves to really managing the budget as closely as we could. And we did. And we ended up with like $400,000 left over towards the end of the project from the project contingency. And then we were able to do some of these things, upgrade some of the furniture, do some nicer interior stuff. And then we were able to get this 122 panel solar array. So the last thing that I wanted to say, there's a slide that I felt like I needed to add, is that in this COVID era and this era in the post-George Floyd world, we here in the Twin Cities, especially in Minneapolis, we went through a lot. We're still going through a lot of grieving and, a really dramatic situation with losing somebody that I personally knew and respected. And then combining that with this global pandemic, and that there are real world limitations of architecture and design. There are things that we cannot control, and even the best designed and the best crafted buildings cannot imagine, cannot anticipate. And we are in so many ways completely dependent upon the staff, the quality of the staff, and the service capability of the people that work in the buildings. And we're completely dependent on other outside forces. We had a situation during Great River Landing last year where during the George Floyd civil uprising, that first night when the police station burned down, a man was shot in the head and killed just about a block away from the police station during the situation. That man was the husband of one of the staff members at Great River Landing. And he came many days to pick up his wife from work at the building. And a lot of the guys had got to know him. And when he was killed that first night, it was devastating for a lot of people. It brought back a lot of trauma of violence and things that they have suffered through during their incarceration. It was very unsettling. There were mental health crises that took place related to that. The COVID situation hit. There were actually 2 men that contracted COVID and were forced to self-quarantine in their rooms. One of the men had a mental health situation where it was bringing back memories of the trauma of being locked in this very comfortable apartment, but he was still locked in and he didn't have control, and he was having mental challenges from that. And he literally kicked out an upper floor window, and there was a fear that he might try to jump to try to escape and to get out of this quarantine. And so that was a situation. It took all the staff on deck. It took, so many people to try to help get the situation under control between COVID and then the trauma and the upheaval and people in the street and, the craziness that was happening in our community this summer during the George Floyd situation. And so we as architects have to be humble, and we have to understand that even the best designed and built building is still completely dependent on so many determinants that are outside of our control, that we can only do the best that we can do. And there's a limitation to that. And we need to just understand that going into the design and the construction process. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate, I know I talked a lot. Hopefully we still have a little bit of time left over to field some questions.
Wow, thank you so much. So I, have certainly read a lot about this building, but to hear you talk about it is really powerful, especially to bring it in the context of really world events that have, evolved after the time that this was constructed and occupied. And I should have mentioned that some of our students actually analyzed this as part of a project that we did on mixed use housing post-pandemic, at least we hope post-pandemic mixed use housing. So some of our students are also quite familiar with this. So some of the questions have to do with post-pandemic and some of the things that I think that they learned. So I'm just going to go through some of these questions, bundle some of them,
Okay.
and then we're going to try to bring everyone into the room so that we can have a chat
Great.
afterwards. So there were a couple of questions about the beginning. So what were some of the activities that you had the men do in order to help them feel comfortable with opening it up? And how did you develop these activities? And then there's another question related to that. After the initial outreach with the buttons, how did your team continue to keep the men engaged with the design process?
Okay, yeah, I can jump right in. So the first question first, the answer is Roger Cummings. Again, he's the artist. He and Takumba Aiken created this wonderful mural. He's one of my close friends. We went to high school together, fellow artists, and being able to have him on the team was really crucial for us. His knowledge, his experience, his creativity in terms of being able to come up with creative activities and ways to be able to broach some of the conversations and get some of the feedback that we really needed, actionable information so that we could design a better building. So he created these activities. He came up with it. Some of them were found object sort of sculptures that were sort of architectural in nature, giving guys some creative building block kind of abstract materials that they could make things, make their ideal home or make their ideal sharing space or gathering space, or just imagine things. And so one of the powers of art is that when you get people's hands moving, a lot of barriers come down, and it's a lot easier to talk when people are busy painting or drawing or fumbling around and making stuff. And so that's really how it happened, and that's how it was intended to happen. And that is one of the things that we do on just about every single project that we lead. The other piece is, I think, talking about keeping the men engaged after some of the activities. Well, a lot of things really happened. So we spaced the activities out. I think they were like every other week. So they paralleled the schematic design process. So it wasn't like we just had this, fun time with the guys and then went home, but we literally had these activities spread out and spaced throughout the schematic design process. So we had two parallel tracks. One was artistic engagement of the men, and the other was us beginning to develop and modify the plans in the program. And so we were able to, have these touch points every couple of weeks and learn new information about what was discussed, what was talked about, what themes came up. And then that started to give us some of the ideas for, we really need a kid space. We need these guys are talking about their kids. We got to figure that out. Like, where can that come from? But we weren't doing it on the back end, or it wasn't just a one and done on the front end, but it was literally an iterative process where, as we went down, the design rabbit hole, we were able to get this great information back from Roger. And so we kept him engaged throughout the whole schematic design process. And then we re-engaged again as we got ready to do construction. And that's when they came back to me and they told me about the not wanting something that looks too finished or too perfect, and beauty and perfection. And that's where those themes came up. So we built the relationship on the front side, and then we re-engaged that relationship when we were starting to buy the materials from the men themselves in order to integrate into their own building on the backside.
Thank you. So the next two questions that I'm going to bundle have to do with COVID. And some of this you have addressed, but how has COVID impacted the space, especially with so many common areas? Has this played a role in the availability of housing or how the men feel now that socialization is limited? And have there been any changes to these spaces to accommodate for both the needs and safety of the residents? And I'm going to add one more question to that group. Would you have done anything differently if you were designing the building now?
Those are a great series of questions. I'll try to answer them in maybe one answer that hopefully touches on a couple of those different themes. In terms of would I have designed the building any differently? No, I wouldn't have designed the building any differently. Again, I think there's limitations that we have with COVID, but the building is spacious enough that they can keep social distancing. People can mask up in the common areas, and the lounge space and some of these spaces are big enough. They're ample enough that they can do some of the basic, stop or slow community spread techniques that we've kind of come up with. And again, those targets are changing. The CDC is revising their ideas. And so it's something that it's really difficult to say that we would have designed it differently due to COVID. It is our hope that COVID is able to be controlled and ultimately we're able to vaccinate our way out of it and return to something that approaches a similar recognizable state. So there's nothing that I would say would be designed differently necessarily due to COVID. In terms of the other things that were happening in the world that are happening around us, in terms of George Floyd and sort of the protests and the civil unrest that we're currently still kind of experiencing here in the cities. I think that we actually designed a building that is actually the exact way that we would have designed it for any other type of social justice and change. Social justice was integrated into all of the questions that we asked ourselves, all the questions that we asked, and the themes that we pushed to our partners and our clients. And so working with this sort of post-carceral justice environment, I think Great River Landing actually has performed very well for those reasons and purposes that it was designed for. And so I don't think that we would have done anything different on that front either.
I'm going to skip around a little bit because we do want to go to this part where we invite everyone into the room. But this one is, what advice would you give to emerging architects and to architecture students about standing your ground while others are pushing you to give in?
Yeah, that's a great one. For me, I just feel like, my father, and my grandfather, when I was growing up, they always told me to do the right things. And even if people disagree, even if people don't understand or see the vision, work with them and try to get them there. But if you know that you're doing the right things, then you just have to stay the course, and that ultimately society or people will come to your position. They will get there on their own time and in their own way, but that you just have to be resolute and you have to practice in a way that one of my professors at UC Berkeley used to always say, my affordable housing professor, Bob Herman, used to always say, never design a building that you wouldn't be proud to live in yourself. And if you're grounded in justice and equality and you're thinking about from an empathetic standpoint that you would put yourself in the position of the people that are receiving these services and that are living there, and that you would make decisions that are in their best interest, just like you would if you had your own family there. Then you just have to stand on those principles. And again, our design process really boils down to really centering the people and the community, and then wrapping the building around them. And to me, that's the ultimate level of service. And I think we have to keep in mind that project managers are just regular people. You know, a project manager, an owner's rep, oftentimes they're looking to do the easiest thing to make the least amount of work for themselves. They're not thinking about, the men that are going to be living here, or what this says to society. They're thinking about, what's the easiest path for me, or what's the least risky path, because the last 5 buildings that I've project managed all have these materials. And even if these materials are inferior and mediocre, putting them into the new building is a comfortable place for me. And so what's more important, the comfort zone of, a project manager, or doing something that will have a positive effect on people and the community around? And so you have to put things in context and be able to make cogent, strong arguments about why the thing that you're envisioning is the right thing for this particular challenge that you're facing. And you got to just be willing to stand on it as best you can. And you don't win all the battles, but you can't be afraid to take on any of them.
And as I have to say that your story about the bathtub versus showers, plus the windows, plus the fact that you're designing for folks that you expect to run into in the supermarket or whatever, are sort of really powerful examples of the empathy that you bring to this project, and I'm sure all of your projects. And actually, along those same lines, this is a question: your use of empathy to give these men a sense of agency through deconstructing labels and making a succinctly interactive building is inspiring. Could you further explain your process in interviewing them to evaluate critical criteria?
Yeah, no, again, Roger Cummings is wholly responsible for that aspect. The questions I came up with were just based on very simple themes. So again, things like, what does belonging mean to men that have been, separated from society? What does family mean to guys that have been away from their biological families? Just questions that are more general, because having never been incarcerated myself, I don't know the answer to those things. I can't speak to that. And so I didn't feel like I could design a building that was just, without being able to fill in some of the gaps and some of the places that, my knowledge falls short. And so being able to deploy Roger in that role, was the best decision that we could have made as a design team, because, he's a very empathetic person. He's also an artist that is from the neighborhood, from the community. He understands what these men are going through and what their challenges are. And, again, I mean, we're from the neighborhood, we're from the community. We get it. These people are not some abstract concept to us. They're people that we know very well figuratively, and being able to create activities that are fun, but sort of elicit engagement and interaction. That's one of his specialties. That's one of the gifts that he has.
And then I'm going to do one last question, and it's going to be a bundled question. And some of this is post-occupancy. So what is the average occupancy of Great River Landing residents? Has the program succeeded in reintegrating individuals into society quicker with this program model? And then what is the recidivism rate for the people who live in this building?
Great questions. I don't have all the statistics, and I think some of this is a work in progress. They've recently, since the building has been built, they've changed their CEO and a number of other key personnel and staff that we work very closely with. And so I don't have a relationship with the new people because of COVID. And so, that's something that I'd like to do on the backside, if we could ever get on the other side of COVID here is re-engage and be able to ask some of those very specific questions. This program, however, has been very successful. It's a model that's been going for I think close to 20 years now, and they've had a ton of success. And many of the guys that have leadership roles as staff in the program came through the program, were trained in the program, successfully worked, and some of them have been hired back. So it's been very successful. I ran into a guy in the neighborhood after a little league game. I'm one of the coaches of my kids' little league team, and there was a guy just standing in the parking lot after the game, and we were just kind of talking, and he mentioned that he did construction and this and that, and we started talking, and he said, "Oh yeah, I work for Great River Landing. We actually do or I work for Better Futures. We actually do deconstruction." And I was like, "Oh, I know that program very well. I designed the Great River Landing." He's like, "Oh, I'm there almost every day." Yeah. So I mean, again, it's when you're from the communities that you're serving, you have a different perspective and a different sort of view of things, and you have a much more realistic understanding of who you're working for and what are the outcomes that are going to help people get their lives back together. And sometimes it comes through informal conversations, random conversations like that. I have first cousins that are just getting out of carceral situations after 20 plus years. Myself, I have, so it's something that it's not very many places removed from Roger and I and the people that we grew up with and went to school with. And so that makes it very easy, second nature, to be able to, to really think through things and try to put yourself in their shoes and to understand, what are the things that would best help them have the best possible outcomes.
Thanks so much. So there are still great questions coming in, but I think we'd like to, turn it over to kind of an open discussion for the next few minutes, if you're okay with that.
Sure.
So, and I should let everyone know that this is a point where Pari, who's been so working behind the scenes here, is going to do what's called promote you to panelist, which means that you'll become visible. So just like at a reception, you're certainly welcome to stick around. If you can't or don't want to, you can simply leave, but we will promote those of you that remain to panelists. So I look forward to continuing conversation.
And I would just add that it will take me a minute to bring in everyone. So if everybody can just be patient, because I have to do this one by one. So I'll do it.
And actually, I'm going to read this one last question here while we're doing this. So it actually is a lot of its comments. I love so many things about this project, but particularly the concept of creating community among primarily men. I feel as though the necessity of social support and connection for men is not always encouraged. I wonder if you've thought about how to create these types of projects on a larger scale, or if you have any projects coming up centering around a similar concept of community.
Yes, that's a great observation. The concept of having a building that was specifically for men, and the unique needs and challenges that men have that are coming out of men's incarceral conditions was very it shouldn't have been, but it was very controversial. This notion that somehow it was unfair to have spaces that were dedicated to serving men, even though there was an organization that was doing great work that literally, has been created to serve men coming out of very specific conditions and circumstances for a long period of time. But there was this notion that, oh, there has to be women here, or there should be women here, or this and that. And it's just like, well, why should there be women in a building where, it's the program is for like this is something for men, like we wouldn't have men say we have to have men in a women's shelter and say, oh, it's not fair because there's no men there. It's like, well, it's not for men. So, so it was rather controversial, and it kind of had to run through the political course, but ultimately it was able to be what it is. And I think the language doesn't specifically prohibit it from women from living there, but it's just that the program developer and the group that basically runs the building is a men's, post incarceration program, and so they were able to somehow finesse it and get it to the point where it could be approved. But yes, this is there's another similar organization here that does similar work. And I've been going to some of their breakfasts and some of their meetings, and there's talk of them maybe trying to do a facility on the east side of the Mississippi River, which is the St. Paul side, sort of to complement this one on the Minneapolis side. There's been talk of this program potentially expanding, and there's huge need, and there's going to be even more need as we start to, one by one, take marijuana and, certain scheduled drugs, basically off of the do not do list. And we're going to have a lot of people that are going to be coming out because prisons are full of people, with low level marijuana convictions. And so as it becomes legal and as it becomes, decriminalized, maybe before it becomes legal in the Midwest, probably, there's going to be a huge flood of people coming back and having been institutionalized and damaged and subjected to trauma that are going to be coming back into our societies. And so we're going to need more and more of these types of spaces. And I think the thing that's particularly important to me is that having this type of a space and being able to try to promote the interaction with kids and family, even though they're living on their own, is a theme that runs throughout. We have a suite in the building that men can have their families stay overnight. So women and children can stay overnight on a schedule, there's a certain process for that to happen, but we do have a suite that is a family suite with bunk beds. And, so we're trying to encourage families to come back together. And really, until men that have been, experiencing trauma and homelessness and all of these things can begin to heal and have something that's specifically dedicated to their needs and their concerns, they're not able to be, reintegrated and become full family members and full participants in the economy. So I think it's super important, and we should be able to have this conversation and talk about why some of these, male specific, men specific programs are necessary in some cases.
Thank you. So we'll just open it up for general chit chat. The only rule is that you have to turn your camera on if you want to ask a question.
And I believe that everybody will just be able to unmute themselves and talk.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
can't, let me know, text, and I will change it for you.
I'm going to say something. First off, I'm so kind of amazed about this building. It seems alive. There's something, the ability, not only the input people had in creating the design, but in the way that, when I might be in a blue mood or a pink mood, I can go in and make that alive. It's really quite beautiful. I was in a little bit mystified by the all the big windows between the first floor spaces and the street, and maybe it's because I'm like really shy, but having all of those activities right out on the street, just I'm kind of curious if that is working the way you hoped it would, that if people feel really comfortable just having all of those activities open to view.
Yeah, there's really only 4 activity spaces that are open to view. The primary one that is on the corner is the community room, and everybody eats there. Everybody hangs out there. There's TVs in there. It's a fun space, quite frankly. It's a space where I came back in to do some other artistic engagement with these guys over the year that it's been built, and that's where those activities happen. Everything happens there. So it's a space where, yeah, nobody's particularly shy about being in that space, and they like being able to see what's happening on the street. And, it's alive, and they're alive. And, it's been very positive in all of my engagements over the years that it's been, the 2 years that it's been built. The other piece I would say is that um, we took some of the spaces and put them on the backside of the building. So, for instance, that lounge space, the big lounge space, if somebody isn't feeling like being, on display or in the room with a lot of windows, they can go upstairs and they can sit and eat or whatever in the lounge space, the resident lounge space, which opens up onto the little park outside and faces the alley, and there's nobody there. So we wanted to give options, and we wanted to make spaces that people could, retreat to. The meditation spaces and things like that. So we wanted to be able to have these spaces where people could be on display, where they could present themselves, where people in the general public could look in and see positive activity happening, and that this building was alive. But then people would have the ability to opt out if they wanted, and there were private spaces that they could retreat back to. So that has worked very well up to this point, as far as I know. And we haven't heard any complaints about that from any of the residents.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to say I love this project. It's really amazing. And one of the questions I have is, so now that the project is done, like, what is your role post occupancy with the project? And then what is your relationship with these men now?
Great question. So my role is really just, architect. So, when we sign documents and put our stamp on a set of documents, we're essentially taking responsibility of the building for the next 7 to 9 to 12 years, depending on, the type of building it is, and the way that the contract language reads out. So if there's anything that's messed up or needs to be fixed, or if there's questions that people have, I'm always open to respond to those questions or concerns. I make myself available. This building to me is a brainchild. It is a living, breathing child of mine, and so I'm concerned about its well-being. And I'm never far away. So I'm a phone call away or a text message away, and I've been several times to answer questions or respond to things, because I'm a concerned citizen as well, so, and a neighbor, so to speak, as well. So that's kind of my role. There's no official role. I have no official relationship with the men in the program, but I tend to be there quite a bit, and they tend to recognize me. And at least pre-COVID, I was just kind of part of the woodwork there. I was just oh, that's the architect. That's James. Yeah, that's James. So everybody just kind of knew me, and they knew me for that. And so sometimes I'll get recognized on the street. People will be like, "Oh yeah, I recognize your car. You're the architect from Great River Landing. I used to live there," or whatever. So it's an informal thing, but again, when you're part of the community and you're just around, um, you have a role without having an official role, I guess.
I ask, one of the things I love so much about this project is the role of the artist. Is it Roger?
Yes, Roger.
And the the sort of beauty of bringing art to every floor and the sort of symbolism that's inherent in that. And I wondered if you got any pushback for bringing an artist along, because again, I like the materials you were talking about. Some might see the art as the extra sort of unnecessary,
Yes,
which I
yes,
don't think it should be, but I
yes.
with that.
So we went through a period. This is what we do. This is who I am. I'm a visual artist, and I'm an architect. And so, 10, 15 years ago, when we were first starting out trying to get work, we were responding to RFPs. I would always have an artist. So Roger and Takumba that worked on those, both of them, and one or the other or both have been to interviews with us and have been listed on RFPs and RFQs with us. Setu Jones, who's another well-known artist that we're actually designing his archive and studio space. He's been on projects with us. Micah Anders is another wonderful artist who works with us on projects, and we center her and put her up front on the team. Say Mukta Dvangse, Mooks, who is a poet and a playwright, nationally famous now. She's starting to get winning a lot of national commissions and awards. Her office is right down the hall here. She's a former neighbor and friend of ours. She's been on proposals and projects with us. We think it's important to bring art and put art front and center. Just like you have engineers sitting around meetings, there needs to be an artist there too. We've said that from the beginning, and it's not a surprise. People that hire us know what they're getting. We don't, there's no Trojan horses. It is literally they're on the proposal. They interview with us. They're at the interview. We explain the process and why they're so important, and clients either select us or they don't. And so we went through a period for about 7 years where, we did not win any prime consultant roles on any projects. We finished second place on a myriad of projects over about a 6 or 7 year period, affordable housing and supportive housing specifically. And it was the art hurdle for a lot of people that a lot of clients just did not have the intellectual capacity to be able to envision something happening differently than how they've always done it. And so there's no art budget in our project. There's no line item that says art. They're just literally part of our team. And just like we have consultant hours for our structural engineer, we have consultant hours for the artists that we work with. There's no art line item in the construction, right? So we found very creative ways to integrate art into the facade, integrate art into the walls. How much do wall graphics actually cost? 6 foot by 6 foot wall graphics. They're a few $100s, right? On a $13 million building, you can do a lot of wall graphics. How much does paint cost? Well, paint's free because you have to paint it a color anyway, right? So a lot of it is just thinking carefully and being very, especially on these projects with limited budgets, just being creative about how you integrate art into the process and into the building itself. And then that way there is nothing for somebody to redline. There's no line item for an owner or owner's rep that gets their attention and says, oh no, this is that extra thing, we cross that out. So it's we've had to learn this through trial and error, but it's really about, one, being very upfront about why you think art is important and how art can have an important role on creating a superior qualitative end product, and standing on that. And so now we have people coming to us. We're the art people, right? We do, I travel around the country, I talk about art integrated architecture. We're that firm now, but it came from just literally repetition. Like, we're literally bringing this team to the table, and there's going to be an architect, there's going to be some engineers, there's going to be some acoustic consultants, they're going to be an artist. And people just got accustomed to seeing that over the years. And eventually, when some of our buildings started to get built, and again, they're qualitatively superior to the sort of vanilla box, boring, colorless, lifeless, sort of typical buildings that people are building around here, then all of a sudden it was like, oh, so the artist helps make it so that it's not boring and mediocre. Oh, well, we actually prefer that now. So we're actually sought out on a lot of projects now. One particular new client that I knock on wood that we haven't signed yet, but there's a major client that we're in negotiations with, particularly because they were attracted to our art integrated architecture stance on things. And they want that for their brand now. They want that to be a part of their brand.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just want to say, I just think this is such a important project, addressing sort of the damage that the carceral state has in the criminal justice system has done to generations. I find it very overwhelming and really inspiring. But I did want to ask you maybe something a little bit different, actually. I was really interested in the comments you had on the 99% Invisible podcast last week about the Skyway. And you made me sort of think about the Minneapolis Skyway and access to things in a way that, as a white guy walking around, that I just never even thought. I was wondering if you could just maybe just share with us a little bit of your thoughts on access and movements and that as well as this amazing presentation. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. For those of you that may not know, the Twin Cities has, in the downtown central business districts, there are a series of second floor bridges that are called skyways that literally connect buildings across the street on almost all blocks in almost all directions. And so you can literally walk, I think it's 3.5 miles indoors in downtown St. Paul, and I think it's twice as much in downtown Minneapolis. I actually live in the Skyway. So this building here, we've been in this space for almost 14 years. It's in the warehouse district, and it's just adjacent to the central business district. And so we're kind of in the artist creative district, but I literally live like 4 blocks away in a building, in a 32-story building that is connected into this Skyway network. And so my kids push them in the strollers to daycare in the Skyways. They've born and raised, they don't know anything other than the Skyway and the artist district. So that's like all they know. But they know the Skyways and all the different nooks and crannies better than most adults do. It's a sense of curiosity, and it's something that's very utilitarian and functional, and it's pretty awesome. It's minus 17 wind chill outside right now, but the Skyway is 70 degrees. Go figure, all year round. So it's something that's very functional. And it's very it's something that we use a lot, and I would say it was designed and created initially for basically the suburbanization of downtowns, right? It was created at the time where the first indoor shopping mall in the United States was created, Southdale, which is about 10 miles from here. And so all the traffic was leaving the downtowns and going to these suburbs and going to these interior controlled environment shopping experiences. So the downtowns sort of panicked. They were losing people to the suburbs, and they said, how can we create our own controlled environment here? And so somebody got the big idea to connect their building with their neighbor's building across the street. And then people could, go inside without having to go into the cold or into the rain or whatever. And so then that idea, just over time, that this thing was for business people that do business in these towers, but then go home every night and don't actually live in the city. This is for them. And so access is restricted. It's very difficult to get in. It's easy to get around, but it's very difficult to get in. There's very few access points where you can get in from the street and get up to the second floor. And so it's really just this environment for people that park in these parking garages. They go up to their office and they come down at lunchtime or whatever to take a morning walk or afternoon walk. And they use the Skyway, but it was set up to be very exclusive. But what it actually is, what it's evolved into, is it's just infrastructure now. It's just no-brainer infrastructure that we've had my entire lifetime, and people just use it. All different kinds of people use it. So now I think the next level of this, which I've been advocating for with downtown residents, with the mayor, and a number of people, is increasing access, increasing justice, being able to turn this thing, like lean into this thing and say, infrastructure is neutral. It's not good or bad. It's just like a bridge or a road, or a tunnel or a train track, but it's about what you schedule on that, how you program it, who it's for. Those are the things that make something awesome or make it terrible, right? So right now it's just dumb analog infrastructure. But my thought is let's lean into it and let's say, let's program the hell out of it. Let's give very clear access points. Let's color code it. Let's light it up at night. Let's celebrate it. Let's have people that are coming into town for conventions or hockey games or, you know, baseball games. Let that be a touristy thing that they want to come and see this really unique thing that we have in our city. So that's where the conversation is. That's where I'm trying to take the conversation, dragging people kicking and screaming into that void. But ultimately, I would love to do a master plan where we really completely rethink and redesign this thing and make it so that there's something for everybody there. There's kids activities, there's stores that cater to kids and families. There's stuff for senior citizens. We have senior buildings that are connected. People walk for exercise. Why don't we have chess boards and cribbage boards set up in certain parts of the Skyway where senior citizens can meet up with each other and get some exercise and hang out and do things together. There's no reason why we shouldn't be doing some of these things and sort of leaning into this what I think is pretty cool infrastructure that we have now in the city.
Thanks. Good luck. It sounds like an amazing project.
Yeah, we're gonna do our best.
So I had a separate question, but I just wanted to follow up with that because I'm actually right now sitting about 2 miles away from Hartford, Connecticut, which also has like a Skyway kind of thing.
Okay.
And I just wanted to know what makes the Skyway in the Twin Cities so successful, because here it's used maybe between 12 and 2 Monday to Friday when people go to lunch, and that's it.
So I would say I would challenge the premise that that it's successful. I think that's up for debate whether it's successful or not. And there's a lot of people that want to just tear them down and rip them down, and it's a thing. I would say what has made them ubiquitous is their own ubiquitousness, right? The fact that it becomes an arms race, right? If the local department store is connected to our World Trade Center, which is now Wells Fargo Tower, if those things are connected, then the other people need to be able to connect to that too, or the rents in that office building are gonna, that's gonna be the it place because it has this direct access. So then everybody that, they're building these access too. So the ubiquitousness of it has created a momentum that has almost forced it to be everywhere. It's in business people's bottom line, to be able to be included. So that's what has led to it just being adapted and adopted here. I would say the weather, when it gets down to minus 25 and minus 50 wind chill every year for stretches of time, it becomes a thing that, boy, the people that complain about it, they use it too while they're complaining about it. So those two things, I would say the harshness of the weather and then the fact that there became a critical mass at some point in the 60s and early 70s that then everybody had to connect because they were disadvantaged from a financial standpoint if they weren't. So I would say those are the primary factors.
Thanks. And my original question was about the building and more about post-occupancy and kind of the boring side of architecture, which is like policy and all of that. So, I mean, there's only a certain number of beds, right? And you have people coming in and trying to apply for these rooms.
Yes.
And so does the success of this building, has it gotten any traction with like the city's lawmakers or anything to say, hey, maybe we need more of these buildings around town and maybe we need to do something about these citizens who need this space?
Yes. So COVID happened at a really inopportune moment. The building had only been open for about 6 months and it was starting to win awards and become, a thing. And that momentum kind of got stopped in its tracks because of COVID. But just pre-COVID, I had lunch with one of our county commissioners here on the St. Paul side, who happens to be the mother of our mayor, who's a friend of mine. And we were talking specifically about doing something on the Ramsey County on the St. Paul side. It was very similar because people were very impressed with, you know, what that building was and the role that it was playing in the neighborhood that it's in. And so those conversations were starting to heat up. There was another, actually the owner of this building, my landlord here in our building, is a local developer, real estate guy, and he had approached me to go to lunch with him, and he was talking about this sort of post-carceral situation and doing something in downtown St. Paul that was similar to this building in downtown Minneapolis. And so these conversations were really starting to heat up. And then I was trying to connect him with the county commissioner, and we were, you know, and then COVID hit and everything got weird, and we're still in kind of weird land. My hope is that we'll be able to, on the backside of COVID, we'll be able to pick up some of these conversations where they left off. And, you know, one of the big things here is we've had a huge increase in our unsheltered population. We literally had a tent city directly across the street from my apartment, just a few blocks from here. We literally had a tent city with probably about 150 people living there up until the mayor was able to get some additional 200 units of temporary housing for folks, recommission a abandoned hospital and do a quick conversion, and, you know, get some units, and then shut down that settlement. But then there's another settlement that's now just down the hill from that on the river, and we've literally just been inundated with folks who have been, you know, losing their housing, losing their vouchers, folks who, because of mental health crises, are unable to have stable housing situations, folks who have chemical dependency issues and will not go into the shelter system even if there's shelters available because they need their fix and they know that they can't have it there. There's folks that are living in these tent communities who refuse to go into shelters when they're offered because they have family connections. They've bonded with other people, and they've sort of have these informal sort of families. And these shelters are women and children only, or men only. Generally, they can't be together for protection or for you know, their, you know, familial bond. Those things are not accommodated in the current way that the system is set up, and so it just doesn't work for them. And so you've got people literally 2 blocks from me right now living in a tent, and it's literally -17, and people are, you know, frostbite and anything you can imagine. So it's a really messed up situation. Some of it is also caused by, you know, folks coming out of incarceral state and not having the types of, you know, options that are available to the general public. And then obviously the financial crisis and COVID, everything is compounding that. On top of all those things, the central cities are where services are located. So we got suburbs, people becoming homeless and unsheltered in suburban areas and outstate areas, and they're getting bus tickets and they're coming to squat downtown because the Social Security office is down here and the this is there, and there's a free food program over here. And so there's some services, there's an infrastructure built out. And so it's attracting anybody that's having a hard time from the upper Midwest. Folks are getting on the bus, the $20 mega bus, and they're showing up here. And it's been happening for years, but it's really exacerbated during the financial crisis in 08. And then now it's ramping back up again with what's happening with the COVID and just the financial situation. So it is a real problem. It's a real situation. It's something we're trying to position ourselves to be a part of these conversations and to be able to design some of these new facilities that are necessary moving forward. But there's a lot of inertia associated with doing things the way that things have traditionally been done, even though all evidence says that it's not working. And so it takes kind of the intersection of a client that is progressive and is thinking forward and interested in doing things differently to affect different outcomes, and then having, you know, a design team on the scene that is local and understands sort of the politics and also understands the technical requirements. And so where there's an intersection of those things and somebody is able to sprinkle some resources over top of it, then something like Great River Landing can start to sprout and can start to grow. But it really takes those three factors all being in place at the same time, and sort of some serendipity for things to really advance forward. Otherwise, they just keep doing more women's shelters and more, single men SROs and Goodwill and Industries and some of these other folks, and it's like that's not providing the services that people are really needing, the support that people are needing to get over some of the trauma. And it's like warehousing people, right? It's like you have a roof, and you have access to food and some basic services, but are you actually being engaged? Are you actually, do you have job training? Do you have work opportunities? Do you have, are there people that you can talk to? Are there crisis counselors that are available and accessible and in the building? That's what we did with Great River Landing, and that is not being done in, even the new conversions that are happening. It's like just putting a roof over people's head is like, then the back pat. And it's like, well, but that actually doesn't like help reintegrate people, get them on their feet, get them back into the workplace and able to be stable and productive. So we just seem to keep repeating the same thing over and over.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So sorry.
No, you can
So
you can go.
I also had a question in terms of the success of post-occupancy. I know that it has not been open very long and COVID happened and financial and all of that. But at the same time, it's really inspiring to hear about the progressive social justice direction that this project has been able to successfully implement, especially with all the positive feedback from the inhabitants and the community. But I'm just curious, is there any formal data collection that is in place to maybe publish, the success of more effective architecture on, more effective architecture for post-incarcerated men in this environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have not been collecting any data. The architectural team, the design team has not been collecting any specific data. It's kind of our hope that the client is collecting the data, and that we're able to interface with them and that they would have some tangible outcomes to be able to share with us on the backside of this when we're actually able to do maybe a more formal post-occupancy evaluation. However, there is data available due to the technology of how much energy that is being produced by the solar panels. So I have an app on my phone where I can literally at any time of the day, I can open up the app and I can see each and every one of the 122 Hanwha panels, and I can know how much energy each one is creating, how much it's creating as a system, what it's done over the last hour, what it's done over the last day, what it's done over the last month, year, over the lifetime, etc. So I have access to that, and that's something that, again, we had to really fight for. But to be able to tell that story, I need to be able to have access to the utility bills. I need to know how much they've been paying in utilities. And so when COVID happened, we were going to do a 1-year assessment on all these things. COVID happened, everything got crazy. Again, several of the people that worked on the project with us that we built this relationship with on the owner side left and took other positions in other places. And I haven't had a chance to actually meet the new people. So there's a disconnect. So I need to know what their utility bills are looking like so that we can do the math and see what percentage of electricity that the solar panels on the roof are offsetting. And so that'll be a data point that I hope to be able to gain access to at some point And again, I'm hoping that they were in the past keeping very close records on the men and recidivism and all that. The new folks that have come in that I don't know, the new CEO, I'm not sure what they're doing and how up to speed they are. They've only been in the position now for a few months. So hopefully that'll be something that, you know, we can reestablish those relationships and be able to have some conversation about what are the data, what are the statistics looking like in terms of the success of different aspects of the project. But right now, all I have is access to the solar panels.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask first, want to echo Lincoln's statements about this being a very powerful and important project. But I just wanted to ask you from the perspective of someone who is studying architecture as a sudden career change, how you go about finding and creating opportunities for these sort of projects, because I feel like there's always a challenge in getting funding or space for things that don't necessarily serve an immediate capitalist purpose. But I find this really important, something that I want to do with my own life as well. So
Yeah. So that's a great question as well. One of the things that I'll say is that for us, for our journey, we have basically created a model where we have certain types of projects that essentially subsidize other types of projects. So we have paying capitalist type oriented projects that have a certain type of project profit margin that allow us to then do a lot of the community work. We're designing the biggest food shelf in the city right now. I just had a community engagement meeting yesterday here for that, but we're doing work that is really important to just regular people in the community. And then we're also doing work with transit, transit agencies that pay pretty well, and some other corporations and things like that. We're doing steady work on one side of our practice that basically allows us to be able to pay the bills and to support ourselves as we engage in some of these projects that are maybe less financially lucrative. We're also trying to fight to push the fees up for affordable housing, supportive housing, low-income housing. Right now in Minnesota, the state of Minnesota caps the reimbursement rate for design fees at like 3.4% for a project of this size, where the matrix falls. And it is an obscenely low amount of money. So out of that 3.4%, we have to pay our consultants, mechanical, electrical, structural, civil, MEP, our landscape architect. And so we have to squeeze them down, right? And then, so we're essentially taking home about half of 3.4, right? So we're at like 1.7. And we're trying to basically run an office and pay our overhead for less than a 2% fee. It is obscene because the level of service that we're actually giving by integrating art, by having a very robust engagement process, spending a lot of time and resources really getting to know people in order to have this qualitatively superior outcome, it costs a lot more than it does to just do a regular market rate project. So in fact, doing this type of work should lead to a higher fee in order to have increased quality outcomes. And so that's a big fight that I've been having. I gave the keynote presentation at our state AIA conference this year, but I also gave a seminar, affordable low-income and affordable housing seminar. And that's one of the big things that I just hit over and over. We just had slide after slide showing the absurdity of, how basically we're capped in terms of the amount of fee that a client is able to be reimbursed for, which for nonprofits means that's the max fee that they're going to give. Anything outside of that, they're afraid that the housing agencies that provide access to the funding are going to be scared off, or that's a red flag because it's over this capped amount. So they stay under that amount. So that basically, artificially pushes down our fees and our services. And so I gave this presentation where I talked about Great River Landing and some of the other projects that are happening. And I broke down all the different services and all the different things that have helped support the men and the folks that live in these communities. And then I said, okay, so should we have a lower fee and do less for people that have greater need? Or do we rise to the occasion and provide the type of support and engagement and additional services and art integration and these things that are going to improve people's lives, and then necessitate a higher fee? And so that's a big debate that we're having here in Minnesota, but we're advocating for, we shouldn't have to lose money in order to do things that make our communities better. It's an incredibly stupid premise, and it discourages talented, passionate people from being able to engage in this type of work. And so you end up with the vanilla box, the mediocre ass brick box, and these things that really don't actually serve anybody or support anybody's journey towards making themselves whole. It's just, we're literally just warehousing people, and then we take the approach that they should just be happy for whatever we give them. It's just like, yeah, actually no, and no, and no. That's not a best practice. That's not going to fly anymore. And now we have an actual real world model for how things could be done and perhaps should be done that is living, breathing, and starting to get a lot of attention out here. So now the conversation has shifted, and we have to continue to put pressure on the powers that be to take this cap off. And that in itself would encourage the creative, good design firms around town that generally charge higher fees, but give much better outcomes. It would allow them to get interested in sort of participating and getting involved with this type of work. So, there's things that we have to do in order to be able to afford to do projects like this. We actually lost 6 figures on this project in fees because there's no way that you can do any building for less than 2%, let alone a building that is supporting a vulnerable population that needs additional care and deserves additional care and resources. So we ended up losing a lot of money, and it put us in a real tough financial position in 2018 because of it. And I don't want that to ever happen again, or have to happen for any other well-intentioned architect that comes in to do this type of really important work.
We have to wrap it up. And that was amazing. That was a wonderful presentation and discussion. And you're doing amazing work. And we hope we cross paths in person sometime soon.
Yeah, so, you got to kick COVID and be able to get back together again. And
yeah,
I appreciate you guys, being here and staying for this conversation. I always enjoy engaging with folks around topics that are this important and this significant. So thanks for inviting me to this conversation, and thanks you guys for staying on and having it with me.
Well, back at you. So thank you again so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Stay warm out there.
Yeah.
We'll do my best.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Good night.